So Alana has 4 minutes, and we also need to spend a little bit of time with Kelly. So Alana, ready, set, go.
Hey, that's how much money we have, so 4 minutes more. You know what, that's a perfect lead-in to what John presented there, because I think that's going to help us in our financial planning as we go forward in the future and what we need from a capital asset standpoint. All right, finance, I could talk for hours, we know that, so I tried to boil it down to the most important things that I wanted to say today. I think that fiscal responsibility is important to everyone at this room and in this room, and it is just paramount to what we do. So I know the documents and the data that we always use to demonstrate that fiscal responsibility, but one of the things I'm interested in working with you and probably through the Finance Committee is, what do you need to see that says to you we are fiscally responsible? And to do that, I'm going to be telling you about the documents and the data that exist in our hands to help you guide in how we do that. One of the things that I have there, and you see on District Finance, the first thing is the Auditor's Data Board. We do get audited annually every year. And as a matter of fact, we've been, Sarah, Bob, and I have kind of been talking about that. The audit was just released last Tuesday. It is a clean opinion, which is the best you can get. That's the top. There are no comments or recommendations for improvement. And I always say that, but more importantly, there are no citations. There are no compliance with any state or federal laws whatsoever. The audit does qualify again for the Auditor's Data Award, and that's usually announced 2 or 3 weeks after the audits are released. So that is one element that we see as fiscal responsibility. Our reporting is clear, it's clean, it complies with all state and federal laws, and it complies with the GASB Board, so Governmental Accounting Standards Board. We issue statements that are in compliance with what all the federal regulatories say that we need to do. So moving on to a second thing, and it does have a link there, and you're going to see the residential tax rates. And if you link on that, lost my mouse here for a minute. What I have for you there is the districts that we look at. If a resident lived there, what would the rate be on their home? And I've included all of Hamilton County. And one of the things that I've included are comparable Warren County schools. When you get to schools that compare to Forest Hills, you're going to find that Kings, Loveland, and Mason are some of our most like us. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but every year the state looks at all 612 school districts in the state of Ohio, and they say, what 20 compare most like, say, Forest Hills? What is a group of 20 that compares most like Forest Hills? And when you look at that, Kings, Loveland, Mason, and Lakota in our area where someone worked in the Cincinnati area are within the 20 school districts out of 612 that look most like us. Now, to me, I didn't include Lakota. It's way on the other side of town. It's double our size. I guess living in the community, when you hear people talk about moving, you most likely hear out of those 4 comparables, you hear Loveland, Kings, Mason, and Milford is already on here. Milford kind of goes, they recompute these 20 every year. Milford will go in and out. They are not in our 20 this year, but Milford will go in and out. But if you look at this comparable residence tax rates, you can see that out of the 25 schools I have listed there, we're 17, and we are well below the average tax rate in that. So moving on to that, if you could go back to the slide and then pull up the CUP report. So if you look at the CUP report, you're going to have to make it a little bigger.
Treasurers have, guys there.
Just for me.
Treasure is a little plus sign to make this bigger. What you're going to see is this is an interactive tool that is on the ODE website. And you can go in, you can select your school district. Obviously, I've selected Forest Hills there. And if you look first column to the left, you're going to see 61 data elements that they have Forest Hills benchmark listed there. So in the middle, third column over, you're going to see similar district average. Those are the 20 that I talked about. And I'm not going to sit here and read all 20 to you, but I think you're going to find the first 5 interesting. Number 1, the school that is most like Forest Hills anywhere in the state, Beef Creek, up around Dayton. 2 and 3, Perrysburg, Avon, local, they're way up north. So,
what were those other 2?
The number 2 is Perrysburg, Exempted Village in Wood County, and then Avon, local in Lorain. But then, the reason I wanted to list the top 5, number 4 is Loveland, number 5 is Kings. Out of the 20, Lakota is 19. So the schools are listed in the one that is closest to you. So the top 20, Lakota is 19, which is why I kind of left them all. But when you look at those similar district averages, those are the schools, and I will get the board, and we'll probably in the finance committee talk more about these 20 average. Similar district averages. And then the third column there is the statewide average of all schools, all 612, all big, small. I don't know that, from a standpoint, it is just that. It's everyone in the state. One of the things that I like about this tool is when you look at the different data elements, you may have a different peer group that you want to pull out. For example, when we look at residential tax rates, I use Hamilton County and then the 3 most similar there that people can move to, because it doesn't matter what the tax rate is in Brecksville, Broadville Heights to the people of our community, because they're not going to move there. They work down here. So the peer group is what's most close to us. But if we're looking at something like special ed expenditures, the people up in Brecksville, Broadview Heights, if they have an 8% population and we have an 8% population, then they're our peer group. And I'm telling you that because there are all these wonderful benchmarking tools to pull out. And the other thing is with the scatter diagram that Scott showed you at the beginning, what it did is it pulled the cost per pupil and it pulled the performance index from the report card, which is another wonderful benchmarking tool. We could do that for any peer group that you decide you want to see. See, I could talk about the Cup Report for an hour, at least.
I'd like to thank you all for showing up today.
Yeah, at 3 o'clock. Okay, and as a matter of fact, just to give you an example, I did pull cost per pupil from, and that's the next link. And Scott did show you how that we compared on the scatter diagram earlier. But here again, you see those same schools. And those same schools, you see Forest Hills is 18 out of 25 of what we spend per pupil. We spend $12,470. Indian Hill is number 1 at $17,200 per pupil. Out of the 25 schools that I have listed there, the average is $13,855, and we are below the state average school cost per pupil, and I have that on there too, at $13,387. So that's, we can close that. I just wanted to know that that's an example of data I pulled from the Cup Report. I could do that for all those 61s. And again, going back to that scattergram that Scott started with is one of my favorite, because you can drill down and we can spend days going through finance, but the school district's mantra is high performance average or below cost. So good return on your investment. All right, on to the not so happy news, the stark reality. Moving on to 5-year forecasts. It is a stark reality that Ohio is just built on going back to the voters every so often to fund its schools. And thanks to all the work that Scott and his group and numerous superintendents and treasurers have done throughout the year, it gets a little bit better, but still they expect school districts like us. They expect the community that has a higher wealth, which is in terms of income and property values. They expect them to shoulder more of the burden in educating their students. Well, as we all know, people of our community already pay more state income taxes that is going to the state, which is what's funding the state share, but our people are sending more up and it's going other places. And I think that, again, that's something both Scott and I could talk about for hours. So moving on to, if you click, I have 2 clicks under the 5-year forecast. The first one is the one sheet story. The second one where it says forecast and notes, don't click on that one. That's the 22-page document that when you really want to fall asleep, pull that out at night. So that's got a lot of raw data in it. But if you could follow the first link there, the November 2022 5-year forecast. And I should mention that the 5-year forecast is due twice a year. So in the board meetings, you're going to be ready, bring your popcorn, you're going to have a 5-year forecast presentation, you're going to have it in November, and you're going to have it in May. So it's due at the end of November, that's what they call the first submission, and May is to be the update throughout the year. 5-year forecast, again, just like John's, permanent maintenance is a living document, and it responds to changes in our income, and it responds to changes in our expenditure pattern. If Betsy gets a new kid that comes in, she has no choice that she has to spend to one of the high expense places. We have to pay that. If we have a bus lose an engine, we've got to take care of that. So it is a living document. Hopefully it's just kind of a goal out in the future. Yes.
Real quick, Linda and I talked about this yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
New legislation coming to the state that changes the way that preschool kids are supposed to be assigned to classrooms. And the model the district uses is an 8-8 model. Don't want to get into all that because we can do that later. But the new legislation would legitimately require that more staff needs to be in those classrooms. Now, we are a district that has a 5-star rating right now that does very well in this area, and legislators in the center of the state have come up with this new plan to be able to staff classrooms. It becomes a mandate, we have to do it, that means more staff. So we have no control over that.
Right.
Zero. And that's where it becomes very difficult to be able to communicate that with our community, because we put out the 5-year forecast and all of a sudden staffing goes up and people are, sometimes people would say, my gosh, look at, they just keep that. We had no intention of doing that. Zero. And we perform very high right now, so why are you making us do it? But that's the deal, and that is very confusing for our community and places us in that whole transparency issue. So I don't want to dwell on that, but you just said sometimes you don't, well, a lot of times everybody looks to Betsy as, look, the IEP or whatever. Well, it's not all Betsy. It's just things coming at us from so many different angles, which is too.
I didn't see the point, Betsy.
No.
She's sitting beside me, so I used her examples.
You didn't, Alana, but that's how it comes to us.
Yeah.
And very few people, other than the 5 seated at the table who are board members, actually understand that in the moment. And then I get to describe it during the levy cycle in people's living rooms at 17 people at a time. And it's very difficult to do.
Well, as a
So anyway, I don't want to
as
hold
a public school district, we educate the kids that come to us, and a lot of times Betsy has no control, and her kids are the ones that are the most costly to educate, so we have no control over that. But anyhow, if you clicked on the top one, that's the 1-page explanation there. you can see the blue bar's revenues, black bar's expenditures, and you pass a levy, your revenues are over your expenditures, and then, because once that levy brings in its new revenue, then it's stagnant. It does not grow with inflation. However, the expenditures do. So eventually the black bar, which is expenditures, begins to take over the revenues. So expenditures are exceeding revenues. And what you see is the green bar, what happens to cash balance when expenditures start to exceed revenues. And when looking at this, the district has a cash reserve policy. That policy is they would like to keep in our cash reserves 10% of revenues. To be honest with you, that's not an exceedingly high policy. As a matter of fact, it's average to low. If you look at some of the government groups out there, the Government Finance Officers Association, the Ohio Association of School Business Officials, a lot of times they recommend that you have at the end of the year 2 months worth of expenditures. So, but our cash policy is fine. I just want to point out that it is not by any case equivalent. But by looking at our forecast now, it shows that given current spending patterns, given revenues coming in as forecasted, the district, in order to continue this, our current level of spending would probably need to seek a levy in fiscal year 2023. In order, once levies passed in 1 year, start the following calendar year. So it doesn't matter if the levies pass in a March, May, August, November election. The first time you see revenues are in January of the next year. So that's how it happens. And the problem is the property tax levy and collection year is a calendar year. We present our 5-year forecast and everything on a fiscal year. So we're 6 months off on timing there. So what happens in a levy, your first fiscal year just shows half of the new collections. And then the next year shows a full year's of collections, which is one of the things that causes those revenue bars to look like they're really jumping in those years. And then they level.
No juice.
So that said, I don't know if there's any questions, and I'm way over my time.
You're not over your time, our group is over its time.
Sorry.
Okay. Questions or concerns, comments, anything right now that is on anyone's mind that we need to be thinking about?
The cash balance that we show right now, how much is that ESSER funds?
The 5-year forecast is only the general fund.
Okay.
As the funds are out in another fund, but I'm glad you brought that up, Bob, because that's one of the things, and we'll talk about this more too in finance. The ESSER funds, we have used that for continuity of service, which is one of the things you can use ESSER funds for. And that has actually relieved some funds in our 5-year forecast, but then those expenditures have to come back.
Right.
And in the next few years, it looks like our expenditures are jumping, and that's not really the case. It's just that we use other funds for continuity. So good question. That's going to be a tough one to explain. It's a valid thing, but it's hard to find the words to describe that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay. You know what? Thank you for being patient with us. This is just sort of the landscape. We started with an excellent school district, and we try to describe that to you the best way we can, and how we function to try to ensure that that service continues to be delivered. But now it's your time.